Good morning, chiropractic students, prospective students. Really, this is the Pre-Chiro podcast designed to really shine a light on the path to becoming a chiropractor. Today, we're having a practicing chiropractor connection and somebody who's really involved in the profession, Dr. Marty Rosen. Dr. Marty, can you get us started by just introducing yourself and sharing a little of what your background was before you became a chiropractor, how you
Sure.
discovered it, and what attracted you to this path?
Okay, so my name is Dr. Marty Rosen. As you said, I practice in a town called Wellesley, Massachusetts, which is about 14 miles west of Boston. I've been there for over 38 years. My wife also is a chiropractor. She retired from her practice, so she runs our practice now. And my daughter is also a chiropractor, and she works with us. My brother-in-law is the office manager, and then we have a couple of other staff running around. But it's a real family practice. Always has been that way. The path to chiropractic.
Hold
Couple
on,
short,
time out, time
yeah,
out. Something just randomly while you were talking just started creating a lot of feedback. Um,
yeah.
did you just change a connection
No.
somewhere, or keep talking to me just so I can make sure I hear you clearly now?
Can you hear me now? Is
Oh
this
yeah,
mic
yeah, yeah.
okay?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Something happened where
All
it
right.
started jumbling, but
You
yeah,
want
I
me to
hear you
start
clearly.
over?
No, 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 no. Yeah,
Okay.
actually, do start over, please.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Dr. Marty Rosen, and yes, I am a practicing chiropractor. I practice in a town called Wellesley, Massachusetts, which is about 15 miles west of Boston, and I've been there for 38 years. I practice with my wife, who is also a chiropractor, though she has retired from active practice. She runs the office, and my daughter, also a chiropractor, 2013 graduate of Life University, practices with us, and my brother-in-law has been with me for 37 years, and he kind of is the office manager, billing, and jack of all trades. So it's quite a family practice. We have other staff as well. But like I said, we've always been a family practice. And I guess the shortest version of what got me into chiropractic is I went to school to be a lawyer. I did pre-law, went to State University of New York at Oswego, and while training for my hockey season, I was playing with some friends, and I got my shoulder dislocated, and I went to a physician, and I was 17 at the time, went to college when I was 17, and he looked at me, looked at my shoulder, and said, "Well, it looks like you have weak joints, and you should probably give up sports." And even at that point in time, I was like, well, there's got to be something different than giving up sports the rest of your life at 17. Anyhow, so through different searches and rehabilitations, a friend of mine turned me on to this chiropractor in upstate New York, actually, in a town called Liberty, New York. And this guy was just amazing. He had a box on the wall kind of practice. His wife sat at the front desk. You pay what you can afford. I think my first visit cost me $2.50. He would take all five of my friends into this room, and he would just adjust us all. He was, diversified, kind of everything, kind of move everything in the natal, put it where it needs to go. And we all went, and his intention was so strong. But I remember actually sitting in his waiting room one time going, I could never do this job. It's got to be the most boring job in the world. He just goes in there and throws these people around and leaves. But his intention was so strong on chiropractic principles. And even all five of my friends, out of the five of us that went, I know that four of us actually, but three of us are still under regular chiropractic care, and four of our five of us still use chiropractic. So it was all about his intention. Anyhow, when I decided that I didn't want to be a lawyer, I dropped out of school and did a lot of different things. I was a taxi driver. I was a welder. I worked for Sheraton Hotels as a maintenance guy. I was a carpenter. And I was living in California at the time. And a friend of mine was living with me. He was a lawyer. And I was really clear then that I did not want to be a lawyer. And I was walking back to my room one day, and this voice literally came into my head and said, you should go to chiropractic school. I was like, wow, that's an interesting phenomenon. And the day after that, I got a call from my father that my grandmother died and left me $5,000, which, remember, in 1977 was a lot of money for school. And the woman I was living with at the time wanted to move back to New York. So we went back to New York. She said if I moved back with her and got my prerequisites, because she didn't want to stay in California unless she would pay rent. So I was like, okay, free money, rent, and that was it. And I never looked back. I went back to school at City University of New York, continued to play hockey. By the way, I didn't give up sports. Stayed under chiropractic care. The guy I saw then was named Joe D'Onofrio. His son actually works at Sherman, as administrator at Sherman College. And he had a box on the wall practice. You went in, he had hours. You went in, he adjusted you. And you left. And I remember one time, so I was brought up in a world of very straight chiropractic. I hurt my knee one time playing hockey. I injured a meniscus, and I called him up and I said, Dr. Joe, I hurt my knee. Can I come in and take a look at it? And he made a special appointment for me, which I thought was amazing. Come in before my office hours. And his appointment was about lambasting me about seeing a chiropractor for extremities, and that you should never do that. And anyhow, then he laid me down, he adjusted me, and I limped for 3 weeks and then started playing hockey again. But he was the people I came in touch with in the early stages of my chiropractic career were dedicated, philosophically based chiropractors, and they practice what they preach, which was what is, I think, the most important part. And I'm not telling you to be a straight chiropractor or whatever the terms are these days, but practice what you preach, which is what I've done all my life. I've always wanted a family practice. And one of the reasons I got into pediatrics is when my wife and I were in chiropractic school. We were madly in love, of course, like a lot of you in chiropractic school, well, when you first get married. And we decided really bright idea would to have a baby before we graduated school. So we had got married. We actually had a baby right after we graduated, but she was pregnant. And when I left chiropractic school in 82, January of 82, I left, I graduated in 81. She was 7.5 months pregnant. And when we had this new baby, I realized that of all the chiropractic stuff I had learned, I really didn't have a skill set to take care of this new being. I was an upper cervical practitioner for a while. I did toggle, but my basis was in SOT. And I'm like, well, the blocks are the same size of this baby. What do I do? So I had to explore different avenues to learn basically what I could do to take care of my family. Forget about the rest of the world. I wanted to take care of my family. I was fine with, patients. I had a skill set that worked with them. I was a clinic intern at Life, so I had confidence because I got to practice a lot while I was in school. I got to see hundreds of extra patients and things like that. But babies, and DeJarnette, who is a founder and developer SOT, was really focused, and if you read some of his old stuff, on the importance of chiropractic care in the first 6 to 7 years of life, how we set up neurological patterns in those first years, and that it's really important to remove them. Otherwise, we spend the rest of our life living in those patterns. But DeJarnette wrote about, out of his 140, 150 books, 5 pages on pediatric adjusting. So I took his work and I modified it to fit into the pediatric world because I thought his anatomy, his physiology, his approach to chiropractic, to the spine, the dermal system, to the cranium was second to none. And that was a great set of shoulders to stand on. And he allowed me to do that. And I was asked a number of times when I was with Sorcia and Sodio Say to write pediatric programs. So that kept spurring me on. As my older daughter says, often I was her practice. So anything that is wrong with her is pretty much my fault because she was my learning tool. But I don't know if I'm going to take full responsibility for that. But that's kind of my story.
Can you talk about the importance of being lifted up as someone who's earlier on in their path and process from somebody who's achieved a certain level of mastery like Major DeJarnette, and him kind of supporting you and giving you almost a belief that in yourself that you're able to rise up to a level of developing methodologies, exploring new territory. Can you talk about the importance of exploring new territory and that curiosity
Absolutely.
that you need to have?
Absolutely. So 2 things around that. Number one, I was lucky. And why I was lucky is people like Arlen Furr, the beginning of Activator, Clay Thompson Pierce was around, DeJarnette was around, Goodhart was around.
Hold on, time out. That's happening again. I don't know if you just hit something.
That's not I know of.
Oh.
I don't. Okay, we're back?
Nope.
Hello?
Play around with the connection point there. I don't know what just happened, but like all of a sudden it's just... All right, go back up. Let me hear you again.
Okay.
You're back. You're back.
Weird. Anyhow, so I was lucky. All the masters were around. Arlen Furr were around and teaching from the Activator methods. Clay Thompson was around. Pierce from Pierce Stillwagon was around. Van Rump, who did DNFT, he was around. I took seminars from him. DeJarnette, obviously, was around. Goodhart, AK people around. So we had some of the founders of the technique around. And what was amazing about these guys, which is so different than things now, is they really, really had to start from ground zero. DeJarnette would travel all over the country and maybe teach 2 people, teach people out of a hotel room, to the point where finally when we'd go to Omaha to his homecoming, there'd be 600 people in a warehouse. But they literally worked their way up from the ground up. And for me, my prototype, similar to what my dad did, was you work. You do what you do. You do the best you can every single moment, all the time, and don't worry about who's better, who's worse, who's stronger, who's smarter, who's faster, because there's always going to be somebody like that. But if you keep working and keep doing it, and you can go to sleep at night knowing you've done your best, then that's basically makes life much more easy and much more pleasant. And these guys were like that. They never stopped. Dejanette practiced for 65 years. He was 92 years old when he died. He still had to practice. He'd come to seminars and to watch people teach what he teach. And sometimes he would just pass out and literally fall off a chair. People would pick him up and adjust him and put him back on the chair. I mean, these people were dedicated. Van Rump, the same way. I remember he came to Sherman when I was at Sherman for a year to teach. And he had just kind of retired and moved to Santa Barbara, but he was still teaching. We sent him out there, and he was an old middleweight boxer, but he did this really amazing technique. These people they were classics, and they didn't, in my experience, they didn't have a pedestal upon which they stood. Like, it was just their presence that made you want to respect them. They didn't have this giant ego. They didn't have social media. They didn't have 250,000 followers. They had people who were dedicated to their art and to learn what they learned. So I would, being the type of person on, literally suck the marrow out of the bone, whatever I could get. One of my favorite seminars when I was with Soda USA, is George Goodhart and Upledger were the two keynote speakers. And it was just incredible to watch these guys. And they had a little bit of a, for lack of a better term, pissing contest when it came to it, but they both had ultimate respect for each other. Dejanette used to talk about Logan. He used to say things like, "Oh, Logan, Vern Logan." I don't remember Logan's first name. Logan, he had the idea. He goes, if you just take his hand and take it out of the butt and move it just up to the cranium, he'd have the whole process. So they had this kind of, head butting with respect, though. They all respected each other, which I hate to say doesn't seem to be as true these days. So I think for me, I was hungry. And I learned a lot of different techniques. And the reason I felt that was important is because I really feel it's important to expose yourself to as much as you can, because eventually, if you keep yourself open and continue to expose yourself, something will click. And that's exactly what happened to me. I was an upper cervical guy. I went to Sherman, toggle for a year. I mean, so much that if I would let my triceps rest, they would just go into spasms. I mean, I was just kind of that way until my wife turned me on to SOT. And she hates this story, but I'll tell it anyhow. She had learned SOT, took an SOT seminar. I was an upper cervical guy. She came home from the seminar and said, "Hey, I'd like to try this on you." I'm like, "Sure, go ahead." So she blocked me, and I went off to work. I was working at that time as a busboy in a restaurant. About half hour into my shift, I couldn't walk. I was literally dragging my leg. And I was like, this is really weird. And this never happened. I never had a problem. And I called her up. I said, "What did you do?" She goes, "I don't know. I just took this seminar." And the short version is that she blocked me the wrong way, that I wasn't what I should have been blocked that way. And it crippled me until the guy who taught the seminar adjusted me a couple of times. He got me back. And I went, anything this powerful to cause that much damage in that short a period of time has got to be something amazing. So that's when I started exploring that. Mm-hmm. So I think, and even when my daughter went to chiropractic school, she was brought up with SOT and cranial work. I kept trying to facilitate her taking different seminars. I said, "You need to learn this. You need to learn Gonstead. You need to learn Diversify. Take this seminar. And she has still gravitated to SOT. That's something that is in her basic nervous system, but at least she gave her the opportunity. And I think for me, I have been adjusted by many, many chiropractors, and luckily, as I said, some of the greatest in the profession. And the one thing I can tell you is the people who are the best chiropractors, it's not what technique they do, it's their dedication and their attention and their intensity and their focus in the technique that they do, whether it be an activator, a toughness instrument, a diversifier, it doesn't matter. It's their focus, their intention. That's what makes them so good at what they do.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And there's so much infrastructure out there that prospective students and even current students are not really aware of, that the groundwork has been laid, whether it's through books that have been written or seminars that have been created. And I remember being an undergraduate and picking up a Goodhart book, Introduction to Applied Kinesiology, in my university. And then I also was in massage school on the side, studying Upledger's work. And that was somewhat of my foundation, whether I realized it or not. I chose a school based on location, which is not what I'm recommending these days. I really want people to explore.
I did the same thing.
And I transferred and saw how many different approaches there were in chiropractic, how many different expressions that had been developed and created over decades, and books had
Mhm,
been written, texts
mhm,
that these
mhm.
students at the other school had never gotten exposure to. And I was thirsty to share it with them because I built relationships. I cared about the students that I went to school with at the first school, and I knew they were never going to get that exposure. So that's where
Yep.
this project really was birthed. And I reached out to people like you, seeing that you were a leader within the world of SOT. I think back then you were really entrenched in the SOT,
Yep.
USA,
Yep.
uh,
So USA. Yep. I was
yeah, Soto
president at the time.
USA,
Yep.
and Charles Blum, and you
Oh,
were
so yeah.
publishing papers and developing
Yep.
materials and workbooks. And
Hmm.
I really wanted this to get exposed, or I wanted students to get exposed as soon as possible, because the reason, besides location, and I say location, but my dad's friend was a SOT practitioner close to the school in
Oh,
Portland. And so he still practices to this day at 75 years old.
who is it?
His name is Dr. Robert Sherman,
Oh, yeah.
and
Okay.
he's also from New York, and
Right.
moved to the West Coast. And he reminded me, or one day he told me a story of being on Desjardins' table,
Mhm.
and Desjardins was holding his skull, and he said, "Did you used to do some LSD?" And he was like, "No, no," because he was around a lot of different docs and students. And he said, I don't know how the heck he knew that, but he
Mhm.
just had
Mhm.
an understanding of the cranium
Oh,
that
yeah.
was really deep.
Hmm.
Can you go into depth on SOT, the framework? I know that when you go to the conferences, there are multiple tracks
Yep.
with one organization, and
Sure.
that SOT has been developed. Can you talk about
Sure.
some of the manuals that were written in like 1984, or some of the other texts
Sure.
that
Sure.
built up to where we're at today, and what your contribution and involvement with SOT has been throughout the last couple decades?
Sure. So, Dijanet graduated chiropractic school in 1924. And when he graduated chiropractic school, he also went to osteopathic school. And one of his mentors or tutors was Sutherland. And the reason Dijanet started in chiropractic is he was an engineer. And he worked for the Ford Motor Company, and he got caught in an explosion, and he got severely injured. And through chiropractic, and actually through both cranial work and chiropractic, he started to get his life back. But he got so bad, and he was hurt so bad, that he actually thought of killing himself at one point in time. And eventually he got good enough to open up a barbershop. And he opened up a barbershop, and being an engineer, he couldn't stand for long periods of time. So he developed this chair that would fit around the barbershop so he could sit and swivel around and cut people's hair. And I guess the story goes that the president of Lincoln Chiropractic College at the time lived in the same town and came in to get his hair cut. And he asked him what had gone on. And he told him the story. He goes, "Come to our school, we'll help you." And he did. And then Dijanet became a chiropractor. And when he got into the chiropractic profession, he felt that chiropractors were kind of missing the boat a little bit. It wasn't just about moving a bone from point A to point B, that there was much more to the nervous system, dermal system, cranium. He'd be exposed to that. So he started to literally experiment. And for years and years and years, his practice was about his wife, Toddy, used to sit in the room and take notes, and he would do stuff. And then people would come back and he would do more stuff. And he would do all these, and he would find interrelationships, like his things like occipital fibers, trapezius fibers. He would find these interrelationships, and either he would research it himself, or he would hire researchers to actually say, what's the neurology behind this? How come I'm finding this? Like, why does this swell? And why does this go away when I adjust it? So he became an amazing researcher. He had people do that work. He wrote somewhere around 140 different manuals, starting way back. At one point he started to codify his work, and the 1984 book that you mentioned is a codification of all his work. And what he tried to do is make it so the profession could understand it. Dijanet, I really think, was a genius. I do. If you read, like, one of my favorite books is 1967 Philosophy, Art, and Science of Sacral Occipital Technique, which lays down his foundation of why SOT works. And if you read it, you realize the things he found are the stuff we're finding now about cerebrospinal fluid, the dermal system, neurological development. It's all stuff that he found or intuited, I guess, because he didn't have the tool. He didn't have MRIs or CT scans or PET scans or any of that stuff. So he intuited all that stuff. And anyhow, over the years, he would teach, like I said, hundreds and hundreds of people would come to watch him and listen to him teach. So he started to break down the work that he could teach us. So he went from 8 systems of what he called subluxations, actually called them different levels of subluxation, and codified them into 3 categories. Being a genius, he was also kind of simple, so they're category 1, 2, and 3. The categories are basically subluxation patterns that we determine over years. So, for example, a category 1 is what we call the primary subluxation. It affects the dermalingeal system, the reciprocal motion between the sacral and occiput, tension in the dura, and basically that is where the initial subluxation occurs. Usually, as Jeanette said, and what we know from the birth process, also in the upper cervical spine, most vulnerable area, it affects that primary, what he calls the primary respiratory mechanism. Primary respiratory mechanism is that system that controls movement of cerebral spinal fluid as well as tension in the dermalingeal system. And he felt, and he wrote this numerous times, that if that primary subluxation goes unchecked and uncorrected, then it will be a primary source of stimulus throughout the rest of your life. And he felt that that subluxation always occurred before the first 7 years of life. So he realized that people who were coming to his office at 30 or 40 with all these problems were a compilation of a process that fell apart basically over time. And that's where category 2 came in. Category 2 is more of a structural issue, but it's based on the inability of the sacrum to create its normal motion or nutation, so to speak, is what the term is today. And so the sacroiliac ligaments compensate for that and they start to stretch. And once they do, you create a hypermobility in the sacroiliac joint. Once that base gets offset, it starts to create compensatory changes all the way up and down the spine, all the way into the cranium, into the sutural system of the cranium. That's category 2. That's what most people see in their office. That's doc, I have neck pain, head pain, knee pain, low back pain, shoulder, it's a whole list of more often, physical symptomatology. If that goes unchecked, then the process starts to deteriorate. Like we know, hypermobile joints get worn, they get calcified, and that becomes a category 3. So category 3 is usually long-term neurodegenerative changes. Disc degeneration almost always is some kind of radicular syndrome because the condition has progressed to the point where there might be sciatic radiculitis, brachioplectus radiculitis. So that's the category 3. And his job was to codify each category. So when a person comes into your office, he set up a system that you would determine where they were on that day, what category, what they were presenting. And the goal was ideally to walk them back through that process, to basically peel off the layers of the onion. So if someone, and we all know this, someone comes into your office, they have raging sciatica, bulging disc, degenerative arthritis, that didn't happen yesterday. It wasn't because they picked up the groceries in the trunk the wrong way. So his process was, okay, this is where you're at. Now we want to try and work back as far as we can. The reason he thought it was better to catch people earlier, which makes all sense to us these days, is because the earlier you catch it, the easier it is to back up. So in my world, dealing with pediatrics, most of these kids are what we consider category 1. We're dealing with primary subluxations. And why I think it's so important and so vital is if we can stop these primary subluxations from progressing, we can stop them from making compensatory changes, that will affect their entire life. So what chiropractors always talk about is human potential. That will change their thresholds, that will give them the greatest ability to reach their true potential neurologically and functionally. So that was his thing. So when I got into chiropractic school, as I said, when my wife did that adjustment on me, I was like, this stuff is amazing. If you've heard me speak either previously or now, you probably figure out that my left brain is pretty much the leader. So what made SOT so amazing is that you could go very, very deep. You can go through, SOT has the adjusting protocols, then you move to the cranium, then you can move to the soft tissue reflex work, which is what they call CMRT or chiropractic manipulative reflex work, dealing with organ systems. So it is very broad, it's very diverse, but you can also keep it small. I know people, I have friends who are SOT docs, they don't do any cranial work. So if they're in my area, a lot of times if they get to the point where the patient needs cranial work, they'll refer them to me. I may do some of the cranial work and we'll work back and forth with those patients. Mm-hmm. So for me, I started, like I said, I graduated chiropractic school in December of 1981. I came up to Massachusetts. My wife was 7.5 months pregnant. So I decided not to open my own practice right away. So I associated with a man named Tom DeVito, who was at the time supposedly an SOT doc. And so I thought, great, I'll learn. When I got to his office, he had changed over and he was an activator doc. He did a few SOT blocking things and I learned activator from him. And, I particularly don't feel comfortable with instrument adjusting all the time. It's just not my thing, but he was amazing. I watched him work and I worked with him for a number of months and then we decided.
That static just started. I'm glad that you got through the majority of your answer before. Talk to me again. Let me see if it's still there.
Hello?
Yeah, it's still there.
What
Let's
is
give
it?
it a
I can't.
second. I'm going to talk for a second while we let it
Yep.
pass. I want to thank you for reflecting on not only the life of Desjardins, so just give us some history because I believe lineage is so important, and just to see how close we are to the root of where chiropractic came from and where people have really brought it to. You're
Yep.
describing a system of different approaches within a context of one technique that somebody can go and explore. And can you maybe just reflect on? You talked about you can go really deep and wide with SOT. Can
Uh,
you talk about how long it could take somebody to really just go through some of the materials for one pass through and maybe five pass throughs and why it might be important for students to get exposure way earlier on, even before chiropractic school, so that they
uh,
can start to familiarize themselves with some of the terminology that you just used, some of the concepts, and also just getting familiar with the cranium and how it works, because the cranial bones move differently than the spine, right?
yep. So that's a good point. So I think learning more than basic anatomy is really important. If you can expose yourself to the systems, I mean, the neuromeningeal system and the cerebral spinal fluid system in the last 10 years has really become prominent. People are realizing how important it is. Most chiropractic techniques did not address that. The first one that I really knew that started to address that again would be network. And they talked about neuromeningeal tension. Most other chiropractic techniques were very structurally oriented. So understanding the neuromeningeal system, how it works, how the nervous system fires, and the anatomy and physiology, because you're right, the cranium moves very differently. If you're adjusting craniums and you start to hear popping noises like you do in the spine, then back off because you just did something really, really wrong. So learning those mechanics, I think, is really important. I think, like you said, you're a massage therapist. When I was in chiropractic school, I actually did massage too to get my way, to work my way through chiropractic school. And I think the hands-on stuff does two things. It acclimates you neurologically to bodies and how they work. It changes your sensitivity. It changes your brain. It creates more neural pathways. So the more pathways you can create, the better you are. I used to tell people that if you're a chiropractor, you don't really become one for about 5 years. And that's not because people aren't smart or stupid or good. It's because your nervous system has to adapt. You have to claim new pathways. So I think that's really important. So you said, what does it take to get through the work? Well, my daughter, who is a chiropractor, as I said, was exposed to SOT before she went to chiropractic school, she wanted to be a business major. So she was a business major in a school called Babson, decided that wasn't what she wanted. But her and her friends used to meet and read through all this material time and time again, because again, it's like anything else. You can read Gray's Anatomy superficially, or you can read Gray's Anatomy and really get into it. So I think that pre-chiropractically understanding the art of cranial adjusting, the mechanics of the cranium, the mechanics of the neuromeningeal system, and what you're actually doing when you make an adjustment, whether it be a diversified adjustment, an activated adjustment, what you're changing neurologically. You're not just moving a bone from point A to point B. We're real clear about that. That's not what's happening when you make an adjustment. You're changing a whole set of neurological cascades. You're changing transmission impulse. You're changing neurotransmitter. You're changing hypersensitivity. I mean, you're changing everything. There's nothing that is isolated. That's why technique like Logan Basic work just as well as toggling up a cervical spine. So that's the piece. So how long would it take to go through it? So in the SOT world, just to give you an idea, there are time frames before we allow people to take certain exams. So you can take your basic exam as a student, but you don't get certified until you become a doctor within your first year and take the practical. When you've had your basic exam, you have to wait 3 years before you can take your advanced exam, and then you have to wait another 2 years, which makes it 5 years in practice before you can take your craniopath exam. And it's not because we're being arrogant, and it's not because we're being jerks. It's because we feel that people need to actually have some level of expertise and show that commitment before they're certified. That's my little pet peeve here, craniosacral therapy. It's like you could take one seminar and tell people you do craniosacral therapy. You can be a teacher, you can be a speech therapist, you can be a homeowner, you can be anything to take it. And there's reasons I'm glad you did that, but I won't go into that at this point. But the bottom line is, if you say you have expertise, then you need to pay the price. You need to pay the dues. It's kind of when I teach some of my seminars, I show these pictures of athletes, and so one of the great examples is a golfer. People look at golfers, oh, these guys make $1 million. I can't believe what they don't do anything. It's like, I know people like, I remember reading about Michelle Wee, who's a female golfer, that before she went to school, her parents made her hit 200 balls every day. Um, I know that golfers will practice. My cousin was a scratch golfer, tried to be a professional golfer. He quit because he goes, I'm playing 8 hours a day, and these guys are all great. So it's what you put into it that makes it look so easy. If you're running track and you do a 10-minute 100 yard 10 seconds, sorry, 10-second 100-yard dash, that didn't happen yesterday. You train for that. So it's about, and I think chiropractic is the same way. You train for that. You develop the nervous system, you develop the sensitivity, you develop the intellectual capacity. A lot of chiropractors, and I think it's true for me too, is I have to fill my left brain. But when I adjust, I don't have to use it anymore. It's just there. It's unconscious competence, I guess is the best way to say it. Like, I don't get worried. And SOT gave me that strength. Even when I first started practicing, I remember patients getting carried into my office. I remember this one guy, his 4 sons carried him in. I was never scared. When I was in clinic, a lot of times they would call. If someone came in really acute in the clinic, they would look for an SOT doc to come in, so I was never scared to adjust anybody because I had a toolbox that I could be very low force. I could use high velocity adjustments. So I think that expansion is really important. And I think that you should be willing to take the time, and to not think, which makes me crazy. There's no such thing as Monday morning mastery. If you take a seminar and they promise you Monday morning mastery, I'd probably leave. There's no such thing as that. So it's about taking things where they fit into you. I tell people, when I used to go to Omaha, I'd come back to my practice and there would be certain parameters that I really wanted to learn. And I would start to literally experiment on patients, practice. And my staff would go nuts because I'd be running an average of 45 minutes behind because I was literally practicing in my practice. And I would use these things for several weeks until I felt comfortable with them. Or if they didn't work for me, I'd put them aside. That's how you build your chiropractic toolbox. You learn different techniques, you learn different skill sets. Even someone who does upper cervical, they learn different nuances about it. You could get adjusted by one upper cervical practitioner and literally feel like you get punched in the head, and you can get adjusted by another upper cervical practitioner and feel like your entire world has shifted. It's there. I have a friend who does upper cervical work, and he's in practice as long as I have. He's still twice a year goes to different upper cervical seminars to hone his skills. He's in practice 38 years. And, everybody go, oh, he's just taking an x-ray and just touching the upper cervical. No, he's honing his skills.
We starting to get fuzzy again, and I'm going to use that as just a moment to thank you for touching on the importance of being a lifelong learner, continuing to be on the path towards mastery, never arriving at a place where you think you know enough and you need to stop going to seminars and stop diving deep into your own internal growth and internal process. And I also want to recognize that, when students are in school, there's so many things going on. Maybe they have a family, plus they have all these new classes they're taking, and they have to prepare for boards, and they have to really just pass their classes and get good grades. And in their mind, that's important. And all of what you're describing of spending time immersing yourself in and bathing your mind in these new connection points in the body, as the cranium is connected to the body, that gets pushed to the side. That's maybe 10% of their training throughout their program. And I think if we can really flip that and have that be the 90%, especially before chiropractic school, before things get really busy, before you're juggling 20 balls of all these classes, and I really just want to acknowledge that pre-chiropractic can provide that space and really hold space for people to explore everything you're talking about. Because in college, yes, you do have a different level of education that you're involved in than high school was, but you really do have a lot more time. And if you're focused, that's really the pre-chiro gift, I think, is for them to really focus in after hearing your message, really focus in and say, okay, I want to learn this stuff. I have time on my hands. Like, if I can either be given a stipend to study this, or if I can get a job where my job is literally to study this stuff and spend time with it, there's a lot more incentive there. So I think we really do need to provide incentives. And then students aren't going to need an incentive anymore, probably 5-10 minutes or 5 or 10 hours into it. But I just wanted to touch on that because I think that there's a gap between a high school student graduating and hearing where you're coming from and just being given that nudge, but also being told, hey, it's not that complicated. Just
Right.
spend some time with it. It's going to start to make sense. Like you said, your
Absolutely.
left brain. People need
Yeah,
that logical, rational
they do.
approach, and it sounds like that's everything, that what you're offering is everything. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So.
No, I think it's a really good point, and that was probably my pet peeve with chiropractic school was how much they made us focus on things that I would never use. So I understand that learning is important and a broad learning stroke is really important, and it's great to have that. And I'm not saying to dumb down the education. That's totally not my bag at all. But to make space for people to basically learn the art, learn what you're doing, learn the philosophy, the art, the science behind chiropractic. Yeah, I know it's great when you put up one of those things, chiropractic education, medical education. We have 4,700 hours, they have 42, and we do pharmacology. It's like, yeah, it looks great, but you don't practice that way. So I think you're right. I think that beforehand, it's no different than anything else in life. The better you are prepared for whatever you step into, the easier it's going to be. It's just as simple. It's like whether it's taking a test, whatever it is, the more preparation you have, the easier it is to do it. It's just as simple as that. So right, when you have that time, because basically, imagine if you went into school with a strong basis in anatomy and physiology. It wouldn't make you as crazy. Yes, I know you have to learn every single name of every single vein. What's in between the great saphenous vein and the we have to learn that that's a piece that we have to, and every single name of every bone and ligaments and muscles. But if you understood the underlying number one reason for that, and you understood the mechanics behind it, it would make a lot more sense and it would be a lot less cookie cutter. And it would really broaden, it would actually add to your chiropractic. That would actually add to your chiropractic experience, knowing how that works and why. So it has a name, but I think that that's a really good point. And it's tough not to get caught up in chiropractic school. You're right. We got married when we were in school, and in the last where it was a quarterly system. So the last quarter, especially that we're at school, my wife was in her own getting to her last trimester. School was really not a priority, and luckily we had taken all our classes, so there's very little she had to do. But you're right, things get. What I found worked for me, and I don't know if it's still available, is that I needed to make some extra money. I obviously ran out of my grandmother's money to do that. And we took out some loans, but we worked. I tried to get jobs that would correlate with what I was doing. So at one point, the school had a work study program. So I worked in the clinic as a clinic intern. I learned massage. I went to this East West Center. I used to do shiatsu massage. So I tried to keep my hands in things that would add to what I did, even though I was doing it outside the venue of chiropractic school to make money. But at least there was stuff most of the time, if I could afford it. My wife ran a massage, was a massage therapist at the time in school. She did that. So we literally kept our hands in. I think that's important if you can do that. You're right. I have friends who got pregnant in school, had babies. It's a whole different world. You have a 5-month-old. I mean, I wouldn't want to go to school with a baby because, getting 3 hours of sleep and then going in and have to take an exam is not fun. But I think you're right that you need to, and the other thing I think is probably important is some sort of time management. And not even time. I hate the time management thing. Prioritizing things. What's really, really, really important to you? You're like, what do you want to do? I mean, I've been practicing 38 years. And people always go 38 years. When I got out of chiropractic school, I was reading this book on practice management, and they said the average chiropractor practices 41 years. And I'm like, no effing way am I going to be doing this for 41 years. Well, it's 38 years, and I don't even know where the time went. And it's been years now since I haven't had to practice, which is really a gift. Being able to practice when you don't have to is just amazing, because people ask me, well, when are you retiring, doc? When are you retiring, doc? And I say my story is simple. Probably 80% of my career I enjoyed getting up and going to work. There was probably 20% where I was dragging myself. And now some days it's different, but I said if it ever gets to 50% or below, then I'm done. If less than half the time I don't enjoy being where I am, then I'm done. So that's a gift, I think, for me anyhow. And the reason it is because we, as a family, just immersed ourselves in chiropractic. It wasn't even by choice. It just happened. My older daughter, she's in the healthcare space. But when she was 14, I remember adjusting her, and I remember her getting up and looking at me and go, Dad, I really, really, really appreciate what you do. And I love what you do. Goes, but I hate to touch people. And I said, then please don't be a chiropractor. And, but she's still in the healthcare space. So I think that, I think we talked about this in the beginning. I mean, you need to walk your talk. Chiropractors tell me, oh, I have trouble managing patients. They don't want to come in. I say, well, how often do you get adjusted? Well, I got adjusted 6 months ago. Well, then why the heck would your patient listen to you telling them to come every 2 weeks or every month if you're getting adjusted every 6 months or 8 months or when something hurts? If you have to live the life that you want to express.
100%. Can you touch on what your vision for chiropractors and chiropractic as a profession is at right now? I know after speaking with a lot of chiropractors who have been in practice for more than 30 years, they're a little down on the outlook. They think that chiropractic is getting watered down to the point where it's going to go away. And I'm there to remind them that there are projects like this, and there are people that I went to school with. It's really interesting to hear you reflect on the time when you were in school and how all these different people who were founders of their techniques were around. Because when I went to school, I could count on two hands the amount of people that I was in school with that are now, leaders in the profession and offering trainings to students. And it's amazing. I think that I had something to do with that, the passion that you sense. If you can see people with vision, I think that one of the best compliments I was given a couple of days ago when I interviewed somebody who created something called KTC, Kairos Training Culture. When he said when he got to school, he already had all this experience. He was an athletic trainer with the Olympic volleyball team. But I had a vision, and it made it okay for him to start envisioning things, like seeing beyond the current narrative, seeing beyond the current context. And so I ask you, because you've developed so much and you have such a perspective now of seeing like how this profession has kind of grown and aged over the last 30, 40 years. What is your vision for what's possible if we had more chiropractors that were not only well trained, but also passionate about being in practice and also passionate about giving back to the profession? Because I think I've also seen a lot of chiropractors forget about the profession and just focus on themselves and just their practices.
So this is a slippery slope you have me in, mainly because you started out with, I have friends, obviously, who've been in practice for many, many years, just like myself. And sometimes we sit around and sometimes we get sad. And the reason we get sad is because we see some of the basic tenets of chiropractic not being followed through. Perfect example, and I don't want to get too crazy and around this, and I don't want you to get bombed with questions, but the whole COVID-19 thing. There is a virus. It is deadly to 80% of people over 65 are the ones who died from it. So, and those are people also who have compromised immune systems, whether they have comorbidity or not. Immune system deteriorates over time unless chiropractic care has shown that not to happen. So we have a really small percentage of the population that are under chiropractic care. We have a really small percentage of the population that understand the healing powers of the body from within side out. So you have a COVID-19 situation where I'm watching on Facebook and things, because we're very connected because of our seminars, that there are chiropractors whose basic philosophical construct is very different from what I grew up with in chiropractic. And that is what we see. I have this 2% rule, and my 2% rule is this: no matter what you do, whether it's dance, athletics, music, chiropractic, law, whatever it is, there's 2% that rise to the top. And I think that's still the case. I think that because of social media, though, we're inundated with the 96%, because I don't really do. I mean, we have people who do our social media. I don't do it. I'm not allowed on social media by my wife because she's afraid I'm going to do things which would be detrimental to us. And she might be right. But the bottom line is what you see on social media and what is allowed to be seen is what the 98% feel, think, and do. And my concern is that in 38 years, so since 1981, the number of chiropractors in the world has not significantly grown. When Dynamic Chiropractic, we mailed every chiropractor in the world. When I got out of school, they mailed to about 65,000 chiropractors. Now I think they mail to 70 or 75,000. So that's a 10,000 increase in active chiropractors. I don't know what the numbers are, but what are there, 7 billion people in the world now? It's gone a lot more than 10,000. So I'm concerned about the percentages. I'm concerned about, the 100th monkey, which I don't even know is a real thing, but it's a term we talk about. Basically, tipping point.
Hmm.
Chiropractic still has not gotten up to that tipping point. In the United States, depending on who you read, maybe 6%, 7%, 8%, maybe of the population goes to chiropractors. Out of that 8%, a large percentage of those people go to chiropractors for fix-it care, neck pain, back pain. Low back pain is probably number one, neck pain is number two. So it scares me that two things are happening. The schools are acquiescing to the majority. They're changing schools like Northwestern University of Health Sciences, Southern California, New York Chiropractic College. Now they're adding all these modalities: chiropractic, massage therapy, acupuncture, because they're not making their ends meet, because they're not getting enough people to be chiropractors. That scares me. The other thing that scares me is a lot of the schools that we teach for. So I'm on the postgraduate a faculty of about 5 different schools. Some of these schools, the reason I'm on their postgraduate faculty, because they're no longer teaching techniques. What they're teaching is mobilization of different areas. So they have the lumbar spine, thoracic spine, cervical spine, and they teach you 4 or 5 different techniques to mobilize those areas. They are afraid to step up and use a technique because they don't want to support one technique, is what they say. But then people get out of school and someone comes in with neck pain, and what if their neck pain is because of their sacrum? What if their low back pain is because of their atlas? What if because they don't get to look globally? They look at the area that they adjust and they're taught to do. So even forget about the philosophical construct. They're actually taking the mechanical construct. When someone develops a technique, whether it be Dijonette or Thompson or Allen Furr or Donnie Epps or any of the people that we know that they develop a technique based on concepts. And if you take that and break that concept down into pieces, then the whole is always greater than the sum of its parts. So if you break it down into parts, you're literally watering it down. That concerns me. So there are a few schools that are not doing that. And obviously the people that come to my seminars, it's the same thing. People in my practice, people go, "What do you think of physical therapy?" I'm like, look, if physical therapy worked, then the patient doesn't come to me. So all the patients I see that have been to physical therapy, it's because it didn't work. So my world says physical therapy doesn't work. Now I know that's a now and it's not the truth. So that's the concern I have. So if people are not getting a broad enough exposure to the chiropractic or the technique, then what they're learning is that it doesn't work, or this doesn't work. It's just where, and I feel like it's fear based. I feel like, you look at this whole thing, it's fear, where we're afraid we're not going to make it. Well, guess what? You're not going to make it. Adding massage and acupuncture or whatever. And I'm not saying anything's bad about massage. I love acupuncture. We have a massage therapist in our office. I'm just saying that if you don't hold your foundation and put it out there, it is going to disappear. And is chiropractic going to disappear? No, but it's going to change. Its face is going to change. I talked to Matthew McCoy a number of times, and yeah, he's Matthew rubs people sometimes the wrong way, but I got to tell you, the guy's dedicated. You talked about Charles Blum, man. Charles has put out more research than any human being on this planet, and he's dedicated to that. Do Charles and I have the same philosophical construct about chiropractic? Similar, but not the same.
Hmm.
Different. But you know what? I will support him till the day I die because of what he does and his focus, and he will do the same for me. Matter
Hmm.
of fact, we're doing a Zoom interview this week about something. But anyhow, so it's about that dedication. It's about standing your ground. And it is.
The crackles
Fuzzies,
coming
fuzzies.
in.
Okay.
So I just want to acknowledge you and your effort, and also the people you've mentioned. For example, when I was in school, I recognized there was a problem that I could go to one school and then transfer to another school, and those students don't talk to one another. Those schools don't collaborate. There's not a lot of schools out there. I believe there's 30 to 40 schools worldwide,
Yeah, that's
and
it.
that's
About
very
that.
few. And what I want to say is that there's a real philosophical tenet in chiropractic, which is as we adjust the spine and nervous system begins to adapt and change,
Absolutely.
there's greater coordination in the function and greater organization within the complexities of how the nervous system
Hmm.
functions. And to kind of metaphor that to the profession's subluxated and disconnected because nobody's connected and coordinating
Right.
collaborative projects together. So this is a collaboration right now between me and you because I have a project. I care enough to know that SOT is a pillar within the profession and that
Right.
you're a pillar with the work that you've developed beyond SOT. Maybe it's all within the umbrella, but you're definitely bringing forward things, and I just want to highlight that because I think that it needs to be celebrated. No matter what school you go to, if you would
Hmm.
have gotten exposure to this conversation before you went to school, it doesn't matter what school you go to, you're going to have awareness
Uh-huh.
to have respect for students at other schools. And I just felt like there was this indoctrination when I transferred schools that I was really surprised because I was
Yeah.
told that this other school is practicing witchcraft or they're non-evidence
Hmm.
based, and this
Hmm.
other school is evidence based, so they're just better. And I think
Yeah.
that there's a disconnect that needs to be reconnected for the profession to move forward stronger. We don't have to agree. Like you said, our philosophical constructs can be slightly different. However, we need to at least be rooted in the foundation of chiropractic
Absolutely.
and grow from that. So I totally agree with the concerns that you have. And I think that organizing the profession for the next generation will help bring more camaraderie, bring more shared experience, and also just develop people. Because the reason I brought Christopher Kent up a couple minutes
Oh,
ago is
amazing.
because him and Matthew McCoy work together a lot,
Right.
and Christopher Kent published a paper while I was in school called like Buyer's Remorse: Why a Career in Chiropractic
Uh-huh.
leaves a lot of people with a sour taste in their mouth, either
Uh-huh.
drop out of school or they fail in practice.
Hmm.
And a lot of people are not in practice anymore. And my contention is that we're not being transparent with the incoming students of what they have available to them. And if they
Hmm.
knew that your path was available to them, some of those people that might have dropped out or not made it in practice might have been successful, might have had a very fulfilling career
Absolutely.
in chiropractic because they would have fallen in love with your approach, the way that you communicate, and the depth that you've taken it. Right, like you said, if they're not
Yeah.
teaching the techniques, it
Yeah.
seems kind of simple, or it seems
Yeah.
very like,
Yeah, it's just it just but it doesn't, not only does it not work, it just
right.
simplifies things into a place that it should never be. It's just
Mhm.
not the way to do it. It's like, if you're studying math, algebra, trigonometry, like there are certain patterns that you have to follow to get to the answer, to get the end result. You can't just intuit it, and you can't break just a piece of it away. But I want to address something that you said, which I think is true, and I noticed that you don't mention names, so I won't either. But I taught for the ICPA for about 14, 15 years as well. I taught for Soda USA, Sorcy, and now I teach for myself. Well, hopefully for other people, but my own programs. But sometimes we'd go to a school that I was like, well, this is gonna, pardon the French, suck, because these people have no concept of what we do. And I have to say, it's like finding a vein of gold in a tunnel. We would go to some of these schools that I thought would be the worst. One of them was one of the schools you went to that you mentioned. The students were hungry. They were starving. It was the most amazing experiences. They were the greatest. They were the most trained. They were the most attentive, because a lot of the other schools that maybe are more philosophically congruent got a lot of people like that, and they were more laissez-faire about it. They were like, oh, I've heard this before. I got, or whatever it is that they were, spoiled, whatever you want to say about it. But the
Mhm.
places that were hungry, it was an incredible, incredible experience. And some of the most amazing experience we had was in Europe. We've taught a lot in Europe. We've taught in Spain. We taught in England. We've taught all over. And the people in Europe don't tend to get as much or as many seminars, and also places like England is very osteopathically based. Those people they would burn me out. I mean, I could teach 8 hours straight and they'd still be asking questions like, you want to go out to? No, I'm not going out to dinner with you because I know it's not dinner, you know? And so
Mhm.
you're right. We need to foster that. We need to find we need to find those golden veins and dig them out, because you're right, students, people, I think at one point, and I'm not sure if the number is still correct, but it's pretty close. There's at least a 30% failure rate in the chiropractic profession, and 30%, over a 30% dropout rate in some of the schools. You're right, because people get disappointed, they get disgruntled, they don't have anything to hang their coat on, they don't have vision, and they don't have people giving them vision. And that I think is extremely. We need people to give people vision. And yeah, some of us get really upset sometimes or get disgruntled. My friend Peter Kevorkian, who's probably the most positive person in the world. You should have him on, by the
He
way, if
was
you
on.
haven't.
He's already been
Okay.
on.
Yeah. So Peter's just amazing. And sometimes I'll go out with Peter and go, just tell me again, do you really believe that? And I'll go, yeah, no, I really believe that. I'm like, all right, good. But so there are people like that we need to rise them up. And you're right. I think part of the issue is, you're right. A lot of chiropractors find ways to use their chiropractic license, especially social media wise online, that has nothing to do with chiropractic, that can make a lot of money. And then there are people who feel like they never have enough. Like, I don't know what enough is for people. I know that I have enough now. And but sometimes, people, there are other groups in chiropractic that it's never enough. If you make 1 million, it's not enough. You have to make 5 million. There was a man named Greg Stanley. He ran a company, I think it's still around, Whitehall Management. And basically he did a lot of financial management for chiropractors and dentists, but he also did practice management. And I was lucky enough to meet him in 1983 when I first started practice. And he got up and he said, "Hi, my name is Greg Stanley." This was a financial planning seminar they did for chiropractors only. And he said, "Well," he goes, "if you want to be wealthy and really, really be wealthy," he goes, "you need to leave now." And everybody went, "What? That's why we came here, to be wealthy." He goes, "You will never be wealthy as a chiropractor." And when I mean wealthy, he goes, "You will never make as a chiropractor hundreds of millions of dollars." He goes, "You can be well off, you can be rich, you could be comfortable, but if you want to be wealthy, you need to leave now, because as a chiropractor, then you won't be that kind of wealthy." And I was like, "Oh, okay." I wasn't looking to make 100 million. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but that's wasn't my focus. So he was real clear, and he started out real clear with, this is where it is. And if you can keep, people ask me how you stay happy. And one of the ways to stay happy is constantly lower my expectations of what other people will do. But my expectations were at a reasonable place. And he would give reasonable financial goals that you could make as a chiropractor. And it does two things. One, you make that goal.
Hold on, you're
fuzzy again.
There's a lot going on. It's all good. But I do want to talk about that. Most people are going into $250,000 of debt. And when I do bring this up to the population of chiropractors who had a much more inexpensive tuition when they went through school, they say, I do agree with people becoming chiropractors. I love what I do. I've been in practice over 30 years, but I can't really promote a path that puts somebody in $250,000 of debt, especially if they're the first member of their family to go to college and become a doctor. If they come from, more diverse backgrounds than we've ever seen before. And I say to them, yes, but it's good debt. It's an investment in yourself. And there's ways and strategies that have become available to me through the use of YouTube University that you could actually leverage your student loans to secure a legacy fund for your family through like a life insurance policy. And maybe that doesn't really belong in a chiropractic education per se. However, I would have loved it if the chiropractor that inspired me right before I went to school would have told me, "Hey, by the way, my retirement fund is a life insurance policy that I put money into." And 5-10 years later, when I discovered this, like last year, I was just checking out a lot of videos on that. He said, "Oh yeah, that's what I do." And I'm like, "Why did you tell me that like 10 years ago?" So I do think that setting a context of financial planning or what entrepreneurship does look like is crucial. Like the way that I'm contextualizing pre-chiro. So pre-chiro as a company is three things. One, we're trying to develop a 6-module program, which starts from the foundations and then builds into what's called the inner state, or what I'm calling the inner state. And state is an acronym for the inner scientist, thinker, artist, teacher, and entrepreneur. And then it builds to the pre-chiro apprentice and then the pre-chiro startup, where I'm really encouraging students to start some sort of entrepreneurial venture, whether that be a pre-chiro club on their college campus or high school campus or in their community, or just get involved in something. And then there's the capstone, the independent study, as the 5th module. And then the 6th module is just assisting them in transitioning, maybe cities, maybe they're moving to go to a chiropractic school, and that whole admissions process. A lot of the times, pre-med, pre-physical therapy just focus on the short-term gains, and we really want to focus on that long-term. The inner state is really an exploration wide and deep of things like SOT and different techniques of different areas of study in the science, philosophy, art, but also business and communication. So I just wanted to touch on that. And then the second part of the company, so to speak, is connecting them with mentors. So I believe that if we did have an infusion of a couple $1 million into a project like this, that we could hire chiropractic students to improve their communication skills, but also support pre-chiro students along the way and show that we truly care as a profession and that it is a good experience to go through school or to lead up to school, so that you you arrive ready, prepared,
Mm-hmm.
and understanding of what the program's about. And then the third part is this ecosystem that I'm trying to organize and create so that a prospective student, a current student, can see who the different people in the SOT world are and what their offerings are, and
Mm-hmm.
also other places. Just getting people familiar with, say, the IFCO.
Yep.
And right now, membership, people that work in political organizations are volunteers. They're not even
Right.
getting paid. So
Right.
that's totally different from other professions that are dumping millions of
Oh God,
dollars
yeah.
into their infrastructure. I just want to touch on that because I believe the profession will be a better thing, a better vehicle for transformation on this planet if we had those three pieces, which I believe are like subluxations, so to speak, disconnects that the
Yep.
profession has with the general public. But
No, I think you've touched on a bunch of stuff actually, and I do think that there needs to be some kind of venue so that people actually know what to expect as far as financial goals. Like one of the things in chiropractic, even when I went there, is they never taught you anything when it came to that. You'd never had any skill set. I remember the first time I had an accountant, and he called me up and he goes, "You owe $30,000 in taxes," and I'm like, "How can I owe $30,000 in taxes? I only made $50,000 this year. What are you talking about?" But the bottom line is, you're right. There needs to be a baseline. So $250,000 sounds like a lot of money. Over a career, it's not. And it's akin to buying a house. I remember when we live in a very wealthy area outside of Boston. I didn't know it was when I moved here. Um, but I remember going to this doctor's house. He was an MD, and one of my patients called. He was on the floor. He couldn't get up. He could not move. He called me. He goes, "Will you go do a house call?" It was one of my, first couple of years in practice. I went there. The guy's house was unbelievable. It was in a town called Weston, which is probably one of the richest towns in the country. He had a pool, he had, bronze hallway. I mean, it was just huge. And he ended up becoming a patient. And I remember I was going to buy a house, and at the time. And I said, "Oh, I was freaking out. It was like $120,000." That was, and he goes, "You've been to my house." I said, "Yeah." I said, "It's unbelievably amazing." He goes, "You know what I paid for that house?" I went, "What?" He goes, "I paid $250,000 for the house." At that point, it was worth close to $2 million. And, you only owned it for 10 years. So the point is that what seems like a lot now, if you have a strong financial base, if you're willing to work, if you're willing to be moderate with your money, you'll pay all that stuff off. All that stuff will be paid off. It seems I do feel like we need to deal with the student loan situation. I think it's absurd what kids get, especially when you have graduate loans. What is it, 7% interest now almost? But anyhow, that's a piece of deal. But if you have the skill set, which part of what you're talking about, to understand that $250,000 is an investment in yourself, you will easily make that back. You will easily pay that off as long as you have the skill set to run your business and have the art to perform what you want to do, which is, guess what it seems like parts of your program are both of those things. Once you have that, it'll be done. We have definitely less student loans than you guys did, but we had less money, but we also worked during the school. Plus, I got that money from my parents. But I remember I got this notice after my second year in practice, maybe third year in practice, second or third, that my student loan was paid off. I was like, "What?" And so my wife had been embezzling money and paying off our student loans, but it was like we just kept focusing. I didn't even, yes, it was less, but I don't know if it was less given the current market, of how much, maybe it was, let's say it was $50,000 now. So what was $50,000 in 1981?
mm-hmm.
I don't know what the numbers are, but it's probably close to a couple $100,000. So it's about what you're doing, I think is brilliant in the fact that you're giving people a running start. You're giving people tools and you're giving them a running start so that they are protected and they can make decisions outside of their basic primal brain. Because that's what happens when you're in a survival mode. It's like Maslow's hierarchy. You have survival mode, and then you eventually firstly end up in self-actualization. Most students come into chiropractic school, and most doctors graduate in survival mode. And that limits your thinking. So if you can get them into even the midbrain, if you can get them up to that point and then work their way to self-actualization, you've just done a gift that is incomprehensible to do that, because survival doesn't work. You can't live in survival.
Hey, it's starting to do that thing
Like
again.
just
Hey,
finished the
I love
survival
it. I love and appreciate the energy this morning so much. I have to run, but I
Yep.
thank you, and I will let you know once these clips have
Right.
been cut up and that we're
Right.
able to piece together not only SOT and the history of it, but also
Right.
your work and our perspectives on chiropractic school and what
Right.
it takes to become a chiropractor. So for any
Well,
prospective student that's able to connect here, I'm sure that we'll make a bridge to you. And thank you so much for your time. I
right.
really appreciate you, Dr. Marty.
Right. Great. If you guys have any questions, you can catch me at drmartinrosen.com, also drmartinrosen@gmail.com, or my my office at wellesleychiro.com. Questions, we'd love to answer them, love to connect with you guys. Again, Ben, thanks a lot for doing this, and we'll talk to you soon.
Absolutely.
All right.